Welcome to the Huddle, a discussion about how the changing face of the workplace is leading not only to happier, healthier lifestyles, but also better work. I'm Rian Chandler-Dovis, coming to you from my home in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. I'm a managing partner at Brand Federation, a consultancy built to bring out the best in people by giving them the flexibility to live their most fulfilling lives. On the Huddle, I talk one-on-one with branding and marketing professionals. We'll get to know them as people, what motivates and inspires them, what advice they have for others, and how their lifestyles are supporting great work. Welcome to today's episode of The Huddle. I'm Rian Chandler-Dovis, your host, and today we're going to be talking to Mark Speece. He's a longtime naming expert, and he's going to share a little insight about his home in Atlanta, his dogs, his kids, and how naming became his area of expertise. So to get us kicked off, Mark, I'd love to hear a little bit about you and your professional journey.
All right. This is always a tough one because I get asked this after I speak at colleges and universities, and people say, hey, how do I do what you do? What's the path? And I actually think that my path aligns a little bit with one of those Malcolm Gladwell books where it was kind of the right place at the right time in the right industry and things aligned. Naming directors kind of didn't exist about 2 years before I became one. I was doing business development for a branding firm, and I didn't even really know what naming was or naming as a profession prior to joining that company. But if I back up even further, I was kind of that classic, typical sales and marketing guy out of college, various sales jobs, business development, and then it started to morph into sales and marketing. And I was marketing on Monday and Friday and business development Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And realizing I loved the marketing side of it, but still really liked business development. So then this opportunity to do business development for a branding firm just seemed really cool. And within a few months of that, I realized I actually like what we were doing more than selling it. So at 5 o'clock, I would take off the biz dev hat and go hang out in the naming department and, with all the namers and work on projects. And then I'd go home with a creative brief and, do that overnight, and quickly realized this thing that I didn't realize was even a job was for me. And it was about that time I got a call from a recruiter in New York, and an opportunity to develop a naming practice for one of the big branding firms arose. And that leap from first job in naming to creating a naming practice with one of the top branding firms in the world just wouldn't have existed a couple years before that or a couple years after that. In the interview, the founder, John Elkins of Diefenbach Elkins, which became Future Brand, said that they were looking for someone with naming and business development experience. And I said, well, if you find the other guy, I'd like to meet him. And the other partners laughed, and they all knew that, yeah, this is the guy. So I got to create the practice, develop the process, put a team together, and did that for a few years, and then got poached over to Landor, New York, and ran their practice for a few years. And it was that transition and really working at Landor where I realized I didn't need this great big company around me to do it. It was me, a team of namers, connections to research, connections to legal. And in fact, it was better without that team around me, or that the rest of the company, the layers owned by a company that was owned by a company. And so I started looking at smaller agencies at that point. And, that was 20 years ago, and I've been in naming since.
That's amazing. Are there any parts of your childhood or growing up or early years where you ever thought etymology, naming words were going to be your passion?
No, in fact, I didn't like reading until I was an adult. I didn't, I wasn't interested in English or grammar or anything connected to it until my freshman year of college. I had this fantastic professor who was so irreverent, bordering on crude, who used very inappropriate terms to explain what a gerund was, or, what an adverb is versus an adjective. And these light bulbs went off that he at 18, he was able to connect with my 13-year-old maturity level. And this interest in the structure of the language, the structure of words and their purpose just, ignited. And I still didn't see it as a pathway. It was just this thing I did. Every car I had was named. I loved helping people name their dogs. When we were bored on road trips, we would just come up with, okay, a new whatever, let's come up with a name. Just not realizing that was actually a potential career path. So it was more fortuitous and planned.
Wow, I love that story. I hope that professor knows what he inspired later, this entire career and sort of industry shaping person that you've been. Tell me a little bit about your home life. Where do you live? Where do you work? What's Mark like after he's done naming?
Well, it's a bit of a blend because there very often isn't an after naming. I've tried for years to get away from the factory worker mentality where I check in at 8 and check out at 6. It kind of doesn't stop. And if I want to take 3 hours in the middle of the day to do something non-work related or work until midnight on a project, I try not to count the hours and think of one as work and keep them divided. And that's possible in part because I'm not in an office and expected to, show up on time and leave when everyone else does. And I work out of the house. I've worked in the same location for 20 years in the same spot every day for 20 years. And I absolutely love it. But when I'm not working, I might be playing with the dogs. I might be in my shop working on one of the 5 or 6 bikes hanging on the wall. I might be working on the old truck I'm restoring. There's plenty of distractions, plenty of hobbies to take my time. Oh, and I have kids and I pay attention to my family too.
It's always a good idea to pay attention to the family. And your little spot of heaven on the map is Atlanta, Georgia, correct?
Yes. Yeah, I left that part out. Went from New York City to here and found that Atlanta is a nice balance. I think if I gone directly from Richmond, where I grew up, to Atlanta, it would have been overwhelming. It's this giant city with more traffic than just about anywhere else in the world. But going from New York to here, it created a nice balance. New York was too big. It was too congested. I couldn't get out there and, the hobbies and the dogs and the stuff I like to do when I'm in between working. It's not conducive to my lifestyle. I like to be outside if I'm not in my basement. And Atlanta is a nice balance. Still feels like a big city, but I can go out and play.
Do you have any examples of that time with your truck or your dogs or your kids actually inspiring a name or inspiring your work in a really meaningful way?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know that I do think about naming on long rides, because you're out there for 5 hours and you have a lot of time to think. Inevitably, I forget the names that I came up with when I'm out there. I try to keep a notepad or my phone handy. Hard to do on the bike, but if I'm working on the truck or hanging out in the garage, it's there. And so occasionally that'll happen. But I think what doing all these different things does for me is I'm never in a rut. The shift in the quiet, relaxed time playing with the dogs, or, the heart rate bouncing off the rev limiter on a ride, or, working under a truck or hanging out in the mountains, mountain biking, that constant change in mental state and location, I think is what allows me to get into different modes and go down different rabbit holes naming. So sometimes they're thoughtful, sometimes they're irreverent, sometimes they're scientific, sometimes they're almost a planned ADD support model.
I think that makes so much sense. And sort of just being outside of an office, a rut is easy to get into when you're sort of looking at the same things in the exact same place day in and day out.
Yeah.
Not those external stimulus that could fuel a new direction of thinking.
It does. Yeah. And actually going to the gym is good for that because you're kind of forced in between sets or in between exercises. And that's about as long as I can go. The 3 minutes and then a break, I'll remember the names then. So I actually get a good bit of naming done at the gym as opposed to out on the bike or some of those other things where I get home and think, man, those were good, I think.
I can relate to that. Digging a little bit deeper into your life, one of our favorite questions to ask is that fifth picture on your camera roll. Can you tell us what it is?
Yeah, it's Louie, my 9-year-old Catahoula, and it is legit the fifth picture back. I got a little nervous when I read that, and I thought, oh, am I going to have to cheat and delete a few or something like that? But it was Louie just staring right at the camera. He popped up and got about 18 inches away from me and just looked at me. So he got his picture taken. But in the background is my 20-year-old daughter with our puppy in her lap and my wife sitting on the couch the other direction. So it was actually a good snapshot of what I like to do. One of the things I like to do when I'm not working or riding or working on some other thing in the shop.
So I'm a huge dog person, as everyone knows, and I thought your dog was a Great Dane, but you just used another name to describe her. So I need to learn this.
So Louie is half Great Dane and half Catahoula. And Catahoula is a Louisiana hunting dog, apparently. We didn't know this until literally we were holding the puppy and the rescue org said it's a Catahoula. And so Kim and I just started Googling. It's basically a lab from Catahoula, same traits, same size, a lot of the same behavior. I think the mom was a Catahoula, dad was a Great Dane. So we ended up with a pretty unique blue-eyed, great big dog.
Yeah, he's gorgeous. And what is your puppy? Your 14-month-old puppy?
Millie. Millie is the most nondescript dog. Like if you Google dog, Millie is dog. She's brown, medium size, short haired, but she's absolutely amazing. The most fun, cuddly, affectionate dog we've ever had. So Millie is also a rescue. And she's
I love that the naming guy has a dog that would be beside the word dog in the dictionary. Something about that's just poetic to me. That's
fantastic. So the kids and my wife were supposed to all have equal say in naming the dogs. So I named Louie, one of my daughters named Millie. I don't wield the naming scepter when it's something family oriented.
That's hilarious that your family doesn't let you have a monopoly on that.
No.
How about naming your kids? How much were you allowed to participate in that process?
All right, this is going to take our conversation. I may not get called for more naming projects. So Madison, my wife and I named in 1998. She was born in 99 and ended up being one of the top 3 most common names of that year. So yeah, great, like naming a company Pinnacle. And a couple of years later, we could not come up with a name for our second daughter. I mean, she was due any day and we didn't have any ideas for a girl's name. We had some boys' names. And then Madison, who was now almost 3, had called her Barbie or some doll something. And we said, wait, what was that? And so she named her sister, Kenley, Kenley. And we researched it. It's English and Irish. And we're like, all right, you just named your sister. So kind of over on kids' names.
Yeah, I feel like naming kids is a whole nother process, right? Well, I'll give you that. There's a very different set of challenges naming kids and naming a company.
No trademark hurdles.
Trademark hurdles. Obviously, top 3 names, right? Is there any inspiration you've had, be it a book, a movie, a show, a person that you'd like to tell listeners, really, you should go out, you should hear this, it's going to change your life?
I'd love to say that there is. That for me was that professor, that seed that was planted that just became almost this sideline hobby. And I went from not knowing where to put a comma to being one of those people who corrects grammar. It was a professor. If there was anything, it was being open-minded. Most of the books I read are not great. And most of the movies, I just sit there listening to grammar and wondering how it got past the editors. And no, it was really just that professor, really.
Do you remember his name or her name?
You'd think. How's that for irony? I don't.
That's great. Anything you're looking forward to in the future horizon?
Just the mushy stuff, watching the kids. One's out of college, one's right smack in the middle of it, watching where they're going and what's going on there. I think from a professional standpoint, I am really interested and optimistic, not afraid, optimistic of what tech is going to do to my little slice of the industry and our industry at large, I think it's a good thing. I think there's a lot of power in AI and all the other ancillary techs. So I think things will get better once we get over the fear hurdle and how to wrangle it. So I'm optimistic across the board on business where we're going. I think this model that Brand Federation, not necessarily developed or spearheaded, but really embraced and almost perfected, is fast becoming, at least for those of us who have seen it work, clearly the model. And I think what happened over the past 3 years, 4 years now, has really shown how well it works and how much better things can be under a structure like this. So yeah, looking forward to more of that. Pretty optimistic.
I love that. I love that. And I kind of want to dig into the future of AI and naming, but maybe that's for another conversation. Mark, thanks so much for this today. I have loved getting to know you a little bit better and some of those inspirations in your background. I wish we could remember that professor's name so we could send that person a note and say, you changed the world.
Search that now. I'll CC on my email.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks. Enjoyed it.